Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, we dive into something that every college football fan treasures, data points, specifically a winning record in the Big 12 Conference last year for Joey McGuire, and now all you got to do is do it again. Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to see you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. So make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Thank you as always for making us your first listen every day on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and Chris, today on the show talking about something that, well, we actually haven't had the chance to talk about in over a decade as a Texas Tech football fan. There have been some bowl appearances here or there. You've had some teams, some better than other over the last decade, some memorable players, but something you haven't done is get above 500 in conference since 2009. Last year, Joey McGuire had a couple of ticks like that on the resume, right? Like things you had never done or hadn't done in a long time, beating Texas OU in the same season, something those two will never achieve. I'll guarantee you that right now, SEC or otherwise. And you get above the watermark in the Big 12 Conference, something that didn't seem that difficult once upon a time, Chris. I don't want to belittle those achievements, but it kind of seemed like, yeah, of course we're winning in the conference. But you had quite the stretch, and I think that's where the true curse of the pirate might show up, man, because it has been some time until Joey McGuire arrived and got you back in that category last year.
Yeah, and you and I are kind of highlighting this point I think because there's two reasons. One is because you're right. It hadn't happened a whole lot. And I went back and looked at, since you have entered the Big 12, and the Big 12 has changed along the way with some members being added and some members departing and all that. But the premise is the same in that it's a very difficult competitive league. You've had 8 or 9 conference games since you began that in 1996. And the other point is that you're talking about being an outside contender for the Big 12 championship. Some have picked you to win the Big 12 championship and all those things. You're going to have to, and it's funny because like along that point, I saw, last week I saw Brett McMurphy, we all talked about that. He picks Texas Tech to be in the Cotton Bowl, playing Alabama, winning the Big 12. And all that. And then you see a top 25. I saw a top 25 that was released yesterday. Doesn't feature the Red Raiders. It features TCU and Oklahoma, which I think, people could, so and Kansas State and Texas seem to be the constants. It's just funny because it's just for all the hype that maybe Texas Tech is getting, there's still plenty out there where they're not getting any respect.
Right.
So it's kind of a fun sweet spot to be in. But the point of this conversation was that, look, you hadn't done this a whole lot, Cowan, and you did it in year 1. And I think that's kind of buried amongst the winning down the stretch, winning a bowl game, beating Oklahoma and Texas. I think people have kind of forgotten you had a winning conference record at 5-4 for the first time since 2009. And I think that is important to note because you will almost have to do that if you have any chance to contend for the conference championship this year. You almost have to get into the 6-3, 7-2 kind of range, I think, to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, no doubt. And I, would be remiss if we don't acknowledge also, like you already did to a degree, the changes in the league schedule format that have been a part of this all along the way. It's no coincidence. Look, you were worse, obviously, as a program a decade ago than you were in the Mike Leach decade, but it's also no coincidence that Tommy Tuberville's first year was the final 8-game conference schedule that you had. You went to 9 games after that. You were 3-5 in the Big 12 in that first Tuberville season. But you go to the 9-game schedule, and all the while, Chris, when that was happening, I was on local radio at that time and just saying that this has made every Big 12 head coach's job much more difficult than it was the day before. And you went a step further because then you started also, I don't think mandate or requirement was ever the word. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also started getting into non-conference Power 5 matchups that you were adding to that schedule as well if you're a Big 12 team. And then here comes the college football playoff with their moving target. Oh, this is how many teams get in. No, it's this. This is how many teams get in. And they're telling you, oh, no, we need another data point because, of course, these data points are all made the same. Quality is consistent across all leagues. A data point is a data point, right? So then you get a conference championship game thrown in the mix as well eventually. And I felt like, look, I know what competitively, some teams are in one league versus the other, but I felt like that Big 12 coaches for the past decade have had a fairly easy argument to make to suggest we have it as difficult as anyone in college football. We're playing everybody. It's a 9-game schedule. You're getting an out-of-conference Power 5 matchup and a conference championship game if you hope to be anywhere relevant as far as national title contention in the postseason. So, competitively, there have been ebbs and flows as far as the quality of teams, clearly. But, Chris, that scheduling approach has been no joke for the Big 12 Conference. And I would be surprised if when a coach is considering jobs here or there as far as a head coach, that's not something they might possibly consider because it's quite a different experience than what you get in some other 8-game leagues. And I remember a study that was really interesting. I think it was the LA Times or maybe San Jose Mercury News, somewhere on the left coast, because the Pac-12 also went to that kind of approach, a 9-game schedule. And somebody's running simulation statistically, so, take it for what it's worth. But on average was bearing out that a league will produce more 7-5 records than 8-4 records when you've got a 9-game conference schedule. And what does 7 feel like versus 8 perception-wise or bowl-wise or nationally? A little bit of a difference there. So I've always thought that's been, along with this drought for Tech, not being able to get above the 500 mark, that's been in tandem with it for everybody in the league is a huge, huge challenge because even though that now is no longer, it has been, and I think one of the most compelling offerings any league has to put up for a fan because you miss nothing as far as everybody in the conference every year.
You mentioned the LA Times, boy. They were busy in the last couple of days. The old USC athletic director story. I'm sure Lincoln Riley's going, what is going on? Yeah,
it ain't the Muleshoe Minute anymore.
No, it's that deal. Yeah, it's a bad situation.
Thoughts and prayers from your beach mansion on the cliff.
Yeah. But I mean, they will have to. USC will have to appease Lincoln Riley. It's like you finally get a really good coach and you kind of got it rolling, and all of a sudden your athletic director makes some mistakes. In the 9-game conference schedule, which I don't think will ever go away, and I think that you're seeing that even the SEC may even go to that. I mean, there's the problem for the Big 12, and I agree. I think more conference games, not less, is the best thing. I think that what you have, though, is now you have, if you're the Big 12, I think you've committed to that, and here's why. It's not an even round robin. It's kind of all over the place. There's going to be some teams you play every year, maybe some teams you see every third year, whatever that will work. And we don't even know big picture what the league will ultimately look like. Yeah. But it comes down to TV inventory. You've got to create enough conference inventory to appease your media partners because you don't want to take less money. You want as much as you were getting, if not trying to get more. The one thing I looked at.
But first, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book and the official sports book of Locked On. Got the NBA playoffs going on, Major League Baseball, Tibetan tiddlywinks, or anything in between that's on your radar. FanDuel has got you covered. And right now, if you've never done it before, you're in luck because it's a great time to be a new customer. You can get started with FanDuel right now by downloading the FanDuel app. Safe, secure, easy to use. Woo! First timers, when you get the app, you're going to immediately be eligible for a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up now. Place your first bet and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So don't miss your chance to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today by downloading the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. With FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball.
The one thing I looked at too with when you look back, because I just went back and looked at Spike once he entered the Big 12, and then obviously Mike's tenure, and then Joey.
Yeah.
And you haven't had a winning record in the conference as much as you like to think. Spike did it, to his credit, he did it in 3 of his 4 seasons when he was coaching in the Big 12. Between 96, 97, 98, and 99, they had a winning record in those seasons 3 times. And I think it was harder to get into bowl games back then. You didn't have a bowl game for every team out there. There was a couple of 6-5 type seasons where there was no you weren't selected for a bowl game and things like that, including in his last year. But I think that was for different reasons. They just were like, "Hey man, he's gonna retire," and away we go. But Mike did it in 5 of his seasons, and maybe not quite as much as I thought. But the 2 high water marks were 05 and in 08. You know, he went 7-1, and then I think 6-2 in 05. And I just like when you look at and obviously I'm stating an obvious, so nobody criticized me for being Captain Obvious here, but there's a direct correlation into a winning conference record and obviously some of your biggest moments and some of your toughest or best bowl game appearances, because it ensures that you're going to go somewhere good in the postseason. Every year you go back and look at a year when you won, you know, and obviously again it's an obvious, but it's Cotton Bowl, it's Alamo Bowl, it's Holiday Bowl. Last year was Texas Bowl. Tangerine Bowl way back in the early part of the Mike era. That was a fun memory over Clemson at the time when Cliff Kingsbury's up there, you know, directing the band and everything. But that's what's at stake for you, you know, this year. You know, that's a must if you want to go anywhere where you want to or challenge for it or whatever. It really points to, there's some things that you've got to get done. I think that, you know, beating Wyoming and Oregon, that does set you up and makes you relevant nationally, and but it doesn't affect the conversation we're having here per se. But and you've got to win your home games like you did last year. But you've got to get into that 6-3, 7-2, may take 8-1 to get to the conference championship game. I'm not sure, but that's kind of what we're talking. And I think the point is it just hasn't been done a whole heck of a lot, Callan. Yeah,
and Chris Level doesn't grade on a curve. Okay, I'm more of a curve grader, I guess, because when you say 5 of what was it, 10 seasons? The Mike had in Lubbock, or 9 seasons. Some of those non-losing seasons that are 500 records would take that total to 9. So if you are considering just non-losing in general, I mean, you were in high cotton as far as the seasons you were enjoying there.
Yeah, because you're talking like 4-4 seasons.
Yeah, the 500 conference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Records,
yeah, because
4 more of those.
That's right. And I just looked at a winning record in conference, which again, that was the criteria that we were talking about. Is that first time you've done it since 09? But yeah, there's some 500 records in there too.
And I just don't know. Look, again, entertainment value as a fan, it's been great. I mean, obviously, huge challenge, and you see every opponent in the league. But, Chris, within the world of college football and the manipulative game that it can be from league to league or athletics department to athletics department, I don't know if it's helped or hurt the Big 12 all these years. And I know there's some necessity to it at one point in time when you were shrinking as a league. But, you know, I'll never forget the year where neither Texas Christian or Baylor get into the college football playoff. And there are so many things that others do to keep the veneer of whatever narrative they're trying to craft that year for their league or for their program. I mean, for crying out loud, the SEC will choose where their teams go to a bowl game. It's not like it's some competitive result that you just can't avoid because that's where you were funneled to. So I don't have to tell you this. It's crazy, and there are huge discrepancies from conference to conference. You can't even figure out how many games to play within a season, and you're trying to compete for the same title. So obviously there's a lot of incongruity that you're going to find with college sports, but college football in particular. And I hope that at some point, Chris, there is more consistency, maybe from league to league. That seems like the pipe dream of all pipe dreams. Although now that I say it, I guess the quickest route to consistency among league schedules is to maybe destroy 2 of the 5. And then you just have a few less to get in line. I never considered that back in the day when I thought, how do we get everybody on the same page? We'll just destroy 2 of them. Then the third will fall in line with us. But I don't know I guess what I would consider to be like the golden era of Texas Tech football in my lifetime, clearly, when the Pirate was on the sideline, was really all that much different than the previous decade. I've gotten into some of these numbers on occasion over the years, but you're talking about those seasons for Coach Dykes. 2 of his last 3 were 6-5 and didn't lead to a bowl game. Or your bowl streak would have been even longer whenever it came to an end eventually under Tommy Tuberville. And I know that overall there's a larger winning percentage for Mike Leach than Spike Dykes, but conference, I think it's like a 0.01 differential between the Dykes and Leach era. So you're just talking about like something being overinflated, or maybe it didn't happen as much as you think it happened. We've all got memories from when we were younger that maybe are a little bit different than the reality actually was. And I kind of find myself sometimes viewing 2000 to 2009 that way. Does that make sense?
Well, and I think you have to go back and look at history to understand, because it's different. But this doesn't fit in necessarily to this conversation, but it's a point worth making that like when Spike was the coach, you look at some of those 6-5 records and you look at, how he did in the Big 12, but you forget you're playing one less game a season. Okay. In those years, but one of your non-conference games, I mean, let me just tell you the litany of teams that he had to go play at their place. I mean, we're talking, you go to Penn State, you go to Tennessee and play Peyton Manning, you go to, I think, Arizona State, you go to Georgia, you go to Florida State, because your department needed the money.
Yeah.
And Spike was just like, sure, pack them up, let's go. We'll do it. And so that's probably the difference in some ways in getting to a bowl game and not back then. Whereas if you'd have been 7-4, probably would have punched your ticket to get to bowl games. But now, man, they had to go play the equivalent of a guarantee game, and then you switch to 12 games a season. And you can get a little bit more tricky with your non-conference schedule, especially when you had 4 of them. But there's a lot of scheduled victories in that. And Mike certainly, he took his team to Ohio State. He took his team to Oxford, Mississippi, and to Raleigh, North Carolina. And there were some tough ones, but there was a lot of regional games too, to where they were winnable against your Indiana States or your some of the non-conference opponents that they have. But that was an 8-game conference schedule, too. And that, I think that you're right. It's a different, and that's kind of why you've had this drought. One, you lost your head coach, and you've tried to find some stability, but then your league has been very difficult, and there's nowhere to hide. I mean, when you've got 9 conference games, man, and then you said it. The scheduling formula, and it's not just here, but the scheduling formula here: Power 5 opponent, regional Group of 5 opponent, and then guarantee game. Typically it's like let's do those 3 things, and in most years that's what it's looked like. This year is no different. It's Oregon Power 5, it's Wyoming is kind of the regional Group of 5, and then Tarleton State is that guarantee type game. So. That's also makes it tougher, because the Power 5 games, like last year, going to NC State, difficult to win.
Did you? I didn't know coming into this that we were in the same region as Indiana and Wyoming, but hey, welcome, neighbor. Good to see you again.
You knew what I meant, but
I know
yeah,
exactly what you're saying.
I didn't know that the flight to Wyoming is like an hour and a half. I think.
Is that right?
No idea. Yes. Yeah. I thought it seems like this very far off place.
Yeah, it does.
Colorado.
So you don't have to go over Canada to get to Wyoming, right? It sounds like it's on this side of Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
Hour and a half. Wow. Interesting. Isn't it wild, Chris, just as we wrap this up, just these 4 decades we're talking about, they're like 3 different seasons, like 3 different totally different formats. Spike Dykes, Mike Leach, and then post Mike Leach, 9-game Power 5 outside of the league. Isn't it wild that we, I'm just thinking of Major League Baseball, like how protective they are of their historical statistics and their records. And, we can't change the number of games played in the season. We can't do blah, 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 blah. And I get plenty of it, but college football is like, we don't care. That's all right. We'll just keep tinkering. I mean, you and I have witnessed, it is still changing. You and I have witnessed 3 distinctively different kind of roller coaster rides of a season going back through those decades. And hell, don't even get me started on the format in the border conference. That's a whole nother episode we'll get to someday, back when I was riding a train to the game. Okay.
And Cowan, did you see the recent reports? Because this kind of became the Power 5 non-conference opponent kind of became a pretty much standard fare when the CFP rankings were coming out, and we heard that you mentioned that the extra data point right. And all those things, and it was like, well, this is a fair way to do it. Like there were some exceptions, like we'll include BYU into that group, but anyway, I just remember when all that was kind of happening, and it was kind of fun for the fan because it's like we got series schedule with Oregon coming up and NC State and on and on it goes. But then the Big Ten, I think, came out about a week or 2 weeks ago, and they talked about doing away with that. Like we're gonna eliminate that from our byline or our bylaw, whatever bylaw. You know what I mean? And we're gonna say hey, you don't have to do that anymore because it's now about to be easier access to get to the college football playoff. More teams will go. So why would we want to put up roadblocks? And so that's worth monitoring as we go forward.
That's so funny because I think the opposite way, and I hope as a fan in the opposite way, but maybe I'm stupid given what you're describing there, and maybe there's no maybe about that. That means you should take on more challenges, not less. If there's a wider margin for error, then give the damn fans something worth their money, not an FCS walk them to the gallows and hang them game. Like that annoys me, but that's so college football to actually go that route. Hey, there's a wider margin for error, so let's play absolutely no one in the non-conference. I was hoping, and still am to some degree, that an expanded college football playoff, which gives you a wider margin for error in the regular season, would actually get some of these guys to pony up for more challenges. And again, that comes back to fan entertainment value, which is all I'm concerned with whatsoever. But at the same time, I know that's not the concern of those in the boardrooms or a head coach, an AD, or whatever, when you're thinking, all right, how do we carefully craft our path to whatever kind of season we're going to have here? And, oh, by the way, we're doing it 15 years ahead of time. Coach, do you know if we're going to stink or not in 2036? What kind of challenge do we want to take on in the non-conference? Great schedule ahead of us coming up this season, and we'll talk about some more along the way. The next step, obviously restoring some winning form in conference is great, but if you want to take the next step and you want to compete for hardware, you want to compete for something that's special as far as your historical season records are concerned, how about winning away from home? Road success is going to be another piece to the puzzle we'll talk about here this offseason. And the data point thing, one of the most exhausting college sports conversations I've ever endured year after year after year. I mean, it's just a moving target always. And the Big 12 Conference has never had anything to hang their head about as far as their pile of data points say comparatively to like the SEC. We get an 8-game schedule. We get a conference championship game. We get a Power 5 matchup outside of conference. How many does that make, kids? That's 10. Count the same for the Big 12 Conference, 9 in the league, 1 out of conference. That's 10. Oh, but you still need a conference championship game. Well, I thought 11 was more than 10. Okay, never mind. I didn't go to an SEC school. I'm sure I'm missing something. Okay, we're setting the SEC to the side, setting the Big 12 to the side to a degree because a name's going to be mentioned, I guess, coming up next from Pac-12 country that I don't think we've mentioned yet, Chris. I didn't know if they were going to get a mention. I'm not even sure what it's in reference to, but you're going to offer some clarity on this. Washington State fans, your time has arrived. You're going to be mentioned in this conversation coming up dead ahead right here with your friends on Locked On Texas Tech. Glad to have you along for the ride once again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network with Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan, and before we are out of here, it is our daily pit stop in the land of realignment. And Chris, I mentioned the name Washington State a moment ago. I feel like we're at the land of forgotten toys or whatever that is, where the toys don't work in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, because poor Washington State. Poor Oregon State, the Beavers, the Cougs, just not getting many mentions out there as far as who's wanting you to dance. And unfortunately, it seems like maybe the mention we're going to give them today is one of the more bizarre mentions anyone has gotten so far. So set this up for me because I'm having a little trouble figuring out what this means. But first, let's just talk about what is happening with the Cougars. Chris, what's going down?
Yeah, so this came out late last night. This is a release from Washington State, and their president basically kind of, threw up the bat signal or threw up the X, whatever, and basically said, "Hey, we're calling timeout here." And here's what it said, because I think this is very relevant to Texas Tech and the Big 12 if you're into potential realignment here. Washington State President Kirk Schultz says Washington State athletics will have a temporary freeze on all current and vacant and future positions until further review, as well as a pause on non-essential travel, purchases, and new professional development because of a significant decrease in Pac-12 revenue distribution and a result of overpayments from one of the conference media partners that must be resolved. Relocation of the Pac-12 headquarters out of San Francisco exceeded budget projections as well. Additionally, Washington State projects that Cougar Athletics exceeded its expenditures for the year due to inadequate documentation of revenues and expenses. Bottom line is, okay, just to sum that up, they broke. They're in trouble. They don't know where the next check is coming in, and I think this is when you start getting really. And I don't think I'm overstating it, really serious about this next media rights deal for this league that has been long rumored, but nobody's seen anything, because you are approaching 1 year from now when you don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. And he's telling you right there, President Schultz, is that, hey, we thought we had a paycheck coming in now, and it's been so mismanaged that we're getting far less than what we thought we were going to get. And so it's a problem. It's a problem. It's a scary problem. It's so they're going to be tightening up the old purse strings there in Pullman for a bit. And I guarantee you they're not the only one that kind of looked up and was like, because see, a lot of schools, one hand feeds the other kind of thing. And what I mean by that is you got these billion-dollar endowments. Some universities will help out athletic departments. They'll subsidize. They will help fund. It's not a ton, but yeah, they make sure that they're going to be okay. But sometimes that does not exist. Sometimes it's just like, hey man, athletics, you're on your own. Like you figure it out to a way to make it work. We're over here figuring out a way to make it work too. And I think Texas Tech has actually kind of gotten into the territory because the university has never really helped fund athletics in any way. And I think that there's a lot of schools in the Big 12 that do. And I think that, because the university, like in most places, they do really, really well, with tuition and student fees and funding from the state or wherever state they're in, all those kinds of things. But you've got a lot of these athletic departments in the Pac-12 that are big time endowments, okay, billion-dollar ones, long-term, been long-standing, academic institutions and all those things, but they may not give athletics a dime, and nor care to. So some of these folks are, this is starting to get really serious as it relates to timing and revenue and how are we going to keep this thing going? We're paying these folks how much? We've got this many people hired. We can't sustain this. So hence the reason that, this is real news. This isn't school president telling you we have a problem. This isn't, Twitter wars or speculation or, hey, I heard around the water cooler. No, he's telling you right now, we have a problem. We hope it gets fixed. But until then, we're not spending any additional money, and this has been mismanaged.
No, I think this is a great find, and I'm glad that you wanted to bring this up here today because this is like a real red flag. And not that you didn't anticipate red flags that were going to be real at some point in time, but yeah, it's not, John Wilner versus Dennis Dodd or whatever yet, although it could become that. It's not, these random Twitter accounts saying this, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's someone literally saying, we are not traveling. Don't you start that car up. Don't you run that air. If we travel, we're running with no air conditioning and windows are down. All right. That's the rule. I mean, you're already getting these kind of things like we can't even afford to pay attention at Washington State. So best of luck to you. And what a wild time just as far as conference mismanagement, Chris. We got to get out of here. We don't have time to dive too deeply into this, but I'm sure you've enjoyed this week like I have the story from the Big Ten and their television negotiations. Kevin Warren, brilliant mind as exposed. Oh, wait. I mean, the opposite of that, as exposed during the COVID era. Former conference commissioner now, I don't know. I forgot what he's doing in the NFL.
I think he's working with the Chicago Bears. I think that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, if you haven't seen this story, Kevin Warren, the former Big Ten conference commissioner, promising games to NBC that he didn't have the power to promise. That story is so wild, but you hear stuff from the Washington State president. You hear that kind of story, and you're like, wait, you guys just need a better filing cabinet? Is that what you're telling? This comes down to organization or communication? Just don't forget, young people in the audience, all the adults you see, they're just winging it too, okay? Never be afraid to get out there and wing it yourself because the rest of them are just winging it also. What a wild, wild story on both fronts. And thanks for bringing that up today because, yeah, that's a real piece of information there that gives you a little tell as to what exactly it feels like on those campuses, man. And the heat is high. Of course, you expect Pullman, Oregon State, some others in that category to probably be, feeling it the most at this time, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like the Pac-12, like buried in that release was the media partners or somebody gave the Pac-12 like $50 million extra. I think it was either on 1 year or back-to-back years. And so they had this extra lump sum. Hey, bottom line is if you're ever trying to manage your checking account and, we've seen stories like this where there's like an extra 20 grand on my checking account. I have no idea where it came from. And it's a bank error. They're going to find it. Okay. and if you go try to put a down payment on a Lambo or something, like do I tell them? You better tell them because they're going to knock on the door and then you're going to end up, okay, now I'm in worse shape than I was before. And I really, so, I mean, because what happened was nobody told these Pac-12 folks, this is actually not your money. They've given you too much. And then
how does that happen, man?
It blows my mind. And so you think, okay, well, this is our new budget. This is great. And then you realize, okay, not only was that not our money, we've increased budgets or salaries or whatever, but now we are going to be that much shorter when it gets recouped because we're going to owe it back, and it's just a mess. And so this is part of the issue that Kirk Schultz, the Washington State president, is talking about there. But that is wild. But we've all seen those stories where, like we're in a movie where it's like, man, I got all this extra money in my checking account. What should I do? Should I go tell them? Yeah, you better. But nobody told these Pac-12 folks that. I think league officials or the media rights guys, they didn't say anything. And so until it was, yeah, it's pretty
so crazy,
pretty wild.
Don't go spend that money if you've got an error showing up in your account today, unless in the future you want to be pausing non-essential travel purchases and new professional development. You want that reality?
Then it's right up your alley. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, when they had the extra money, they were broke. So what is this, like double broke? Now that you got to give it back. All right. Best of luck to you out there in Pullman, Washington. Chris, enjoyed it as always, my man. Always appreciate the insights and perspectives. Thank you for the time, and we'll be right back here to do it again tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Keep hope alive, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks again to those everydayers who are out there on the regular, and we'll see you for the next one. For Chris, I'm Casey right here on Locked On Texas Tech.